What do America's Great Seal and Israel's flag have in common? Occupying Till He Comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries.
Welcome, friends. This is Dane Rome, your announcer for today's Last Days Beacon program. Thanks for listening, and thank you for joining us. And just a reminder that these programs are supported by your gifts to this ministry. If you would like to contribute to this ongoing faith ministry, which deals with Bible prophecy and current events, simply go to our website to contribute. Our website address is www.swpm.us. You'll find a donate link on the homepage. The website address again is www.swpm.us. Thank you for your prayers and support for this faith ministry. On today's program, Dr. Snitker interviews Pauldinger, author of the November Last Days Beacon article entitled America is Forecast in Bible Prophecy, Part 2. Mr. Dinger offers a rebuttal of the recent trend among prophecy teachers who teach that America is not prophesied in the Bible. In these interviews, he makes the case that America's dollar bill announces that America is Christ's kingdom. America's Great Seal on the dollar is full of meaning as it relates to America's end-time role and destiny. So let's join Dr. Snitker and Pauldinger for today's informative message.
Thank you, Dane, and welcome back, friends. Today we continue a series of interviews with Pauldinger, author of the November Last Days Beacon article entitled America is Forecast in Bible Prophecy, Part 2. Paul is a serious student of American history who has written several insightful articles for Southwest Prophecy Ministries over the years. Paul is also the founding editor of the Boston Review of the Arts. Well, Paul, welcome back to today's program.
Thank you, David. Nice to be with you.
Well, we are talking in these weeks regarding Paul's very insightful and fact-filled article that claims that America is found in and forecast in Bible prophecy. We talked about some very interesting things last week, but we're going to pick up with some more of the issues that you deal with in your article. The first is a broad question that, again, Americans tend not to be very well informed or accurately informed about our great heritage. Would you begin by explaining the spiritual foundation of the American Revolution?
Well, David, when America was being colonized, and you have to remember that there were a bunch of players who began colonizing the Americas, Catholic mainly, Spain, France, Sweden jumped in, the Netherlands. The last of them were the British. And the British had this idea began because Britain had become, in the second century of the Reformation, the world's leading and most advanced analysts of the Bible, and particularly Bible prophecy. So in 1630, when the Puritans came over, they brought along with them ideas that had begun in the universities of England, Cambridge, Oxford, that America would be the place where Daniel's fifth empire, the empire that would conclude history, would arise. And when Winthrop said, this place would become a city on a hill, of course he was quoting Christ, and it became a sort of the beginning of the Bible prophecy that America is prophesied in the Bible idea that continued throughout American history. If people read the October and November issues of the Last Days Beacon, they'll see that there was a particular guy, a Church of England bishop named George Berkeley, who basically set the idea, the big idea for America, that America was indeed the fulfillment of Daniel's fifth empire. From that point on, in 1726, that became the big idea of American history. The Founding Fathers grew up with that idea. And of course, this has been hidden from Americans, but the American Revolution was not this Enlightenment project, where everybody was just looking for as much freedom as they could get. They went into this war with the idea that God was with them, that God had prophesied America as Daniel's fifth empire, so that when the American Revolution began, it was on the firm foundation that God would be with the revolution, and if he was, they would win the revolution. And of course, they did. When the revolution concluded and the peace talks were beginning in France, the Great Seal was finally approved after 7 years of wrangling, and it ratified and validated the peace treaty with Britain. And it wasn't the Iron Pyramid; it was the Eagle and Stars. And people knew in Europe and in America what that signified, and what it signified was that Jesus the Messiah, the Son of David, the Star of David, was the King of America. And America was the fulfillment of Daniel's fifth empire, the Stone Mountain.
I remember one of the war cries of our revolutionary forefathers was that there is no king but Jesus. And
that's what the Great Seal says.
Yes, there's no king but Jesus. So this was very definitely a spiritual and a messianic conflict. And our early founding fathers were battling for much more than freedom, as is commonly mistaught today. Well, my next question is that in your article, you say that both the Great Seal and the original Stars and Stripes flag declare the same message, and that is that America is a fulfillment of a gigantic Bible prophecy that is Daniel's fifth and final empire. So share with us, Paul, why you believe that both the Great Seal and the original Stars and Stripes flag declare that same message.
Well, the flag came first, 1776. Great Seal wasn't approved until 1782. But when it was originally presented, it was a star circle, and not a kind of wallpaper pattern that it is today. It was a star circle, and it was called the New Constellation. The Founding Fathers didn't explain what they meant by New Constellation, but if people read the November issue of Last Days Beacon, they will see why the Founders called the Stars and Stripes a new constellation, and what that meant was that the flag was the symbol of America as the fulfillment of Daniel's fifth empire, the Stone Mountain, that would conclude history, certainly the history of the church age. And then 6 or 7 years later, when the Great Seal was approved, the symbols of the original Stars and Stripes were brought over and put on the Great Seal, the stars above the eagle's head and the stripes on the shield in front of the eagle's breast. Now, you really have to wonder why these stripes of punishment, and again, you have to read the November Last Days Beacon to see this, but the stripes of punishment on the shield, the question is, why would the stripes of punishment protect America? And unfortunately, I don't have the time to go into that, but it is a symbol, the red and white stripes on the flag, and on the shield of the Great Seal symbolize Jesus Christ.
Yes, and I think of the passage in Isaiah 53, where Isaiah predicts that by his stripes ye are healed, referring to the redemptive work of Christ. So you think that was
right,
in the minds of our original flag makers, the stripes of Christ?
Absolutely. Well, not only was it on the minds of the founding fathers, but the stripes on the American flag were borrowed completely from the East India Company flag. Now, if you look at the East India Company flag, which was a missionary flag, by the way, it was intended to provoke questions when it sailed into, for example, a Chinese port or an Indian port, to provoke questions and so that they could explain the gospel. But the stripes on the East India flag obviously symbolize Isaiah 53, and also one of Peter's letters, First Peter, where Peter validates Isaiah's prophecy as fulfilled, and he says, it quotes it in the past tense, by his stripes you were healed. So it's a done deal.
That's amazing. Well, you also claim in your article that the Star of David on America's Great Seal and Israel's flag mean the same thing. Could you explain that to us?
Well, this is a particularly hidden piece of history that very few people know, even Jews. But around the time America was being colonized, sort of the late period, the Jews of Eastern Europe believed that a man named Shabbatai Zvi was the Messiah that they had sought for so long, that he had finally come. The Shabbatai Zvi incident shaped modern Judaism. There's no question that the star on the flag of Israel represents the Jewish Mashiach. And that's why they use the term David. The first appearance in the Bible of the word shield is in the Old Testament, in Hebrew, Magen, and God approaches Abraham in Genesis 15, and the first thing he says is, I will be your Magen, I will be your protector. So the question now becomes, so why are they saying Magen or Mogen David? Why isn't it Mogen Abraham or Mogen Yahweh? The reason they're saying Mogen David, the shield of David, the Star of David, is because in Jewish iconography, the Old Testament forecast that the Mashiach would be a descendant of David. And so the star on the flag of Israel means the same thing that the 6-point star on the Great Seal means, the Messiah. The founding fathers believed that was Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, and the Jews believe it's a still coming person.
That is fascinating when you connect the symbolism between the two. Perhaps we could infer by this that the founding fathers that were fundamentalist believers were premillennial in that they believed that there would be an end-time regeneration of the diaspora, the ancient state of Israel. Was that a common expectation?
Yes, and it's in contrast to the Catholic Church, which believed that the Jews were forgotten, they were in the dustbin of history, that God was done with them, and that they were the replacement. I mean, the Roman Empire Church was the original replacement theology church. And when Protestants began reading the Bible after the Reformation, they began seeing that God made all these promises to the Jews. And so if God was fed up with them, then his promises would be void. And if you can't trust God to honor the original promises to his chosen people, how could you trust him on the great promise that he has given in Jesus Christ?
Absolutely. That reminds me of the lawyerly argument that the Apostle Paul rendered in Romans 9 through 11 to answer the question, is God through with Israel? And he says, not by any means. And he goes on to detail how that despite Israel's law, seeking righteousness by the law, which resulted in their being set aside in unbelief, that the promises to God, from God to Israel, would eventually be fulfilled, and so all Israel shall be saved, as Paul concludes in Romans 11. And as you see in the argument of Romans, the book of Romans, he uses Israel as a test case, proving the faithfulness of God in terms of his promises that would include promises to the church, promises to believers of eternal security in Christ. Romans 8, and then Romans 9 through 11 is the test case, or the example of God's faithfulness to an unfaithful people. And so if God has set aside Israel forever and cast them aside to the dustbin of history, how can we as church believers have any ultimate assurance that we have eternal security in Christ? If God is an Indian giver and a promise breaker to Israel, how do we know he won't break his promises to the church?
Well, there's something very important, David, I should mention, and that is that on the clock of the American Revolution, Judaism in Eastern Europe in particular was going through its own revolution. And today we know it as Hasidism, but Hasidism was very messianic. And the Shabbatai Zvi incident basically showcased how messianic Judaism had become at that point. Modern Judaism is a messianic religion. On the one hand, the Hasids are so messianic that at the most radical end, you've got the Lubavitchers in Brooklyn, New York, who believe that Rabbi Mendel Schneerson, who died at the end of the 20th century, is going to resurrect, that he is the Messiah. But then you go all the way over to the Reform end, the liberal end. And as I mentioned in the article, I was in a Yom Kippur service in a Jewish temple a number of years ago, and the rabbi declared at one point, we can all be Messiah. And liberal Judaism is as secretly messianic as Hasidic conservative Judaism is, but they believe that good people will usher in the Messianic age. And my point is that America and Israel are spiritually and intimately connected. And so you can't just focus on Israel in the end times without thinking about America, because America was the first to put the symbol of Judaism on, their national insignia. Israel borrowed it back, and the two symbols are the spiritual connection between Israel and America. And as we were talking the other day, David, it's been said that when Israel resurrected in 1948, it was the beginning of the end of America, and the only reason that America has survived is because it was the muscle that protected Israel. But it looks like America is kind of losing its edge, but time will tell.
So it's almost as if you picture history as a great marathon race, a relay race perhaps, that with the coming of Israel and its reinstatement in 1948, that America was beginning to pass the baton, perhaps of national preeminence, to Israel, which of course will be God's capital and God's people when the millennium actually arrives with the second coming of Christ. So we have America being brought into being and brought into preeminence among the nations of the world during the Philadelphia period, as we've talked offline, to borrow the symbolism of Revelation 2 and 3. And then with the emergence of the nation of Israel, which America supported, and an American president by the name of Harry Truman validated, we begin to see perhaps America beginning to recede a bit into the background, as in the plan of God, Israel comes into the foreground as we approach the second coming of Christ and the establishment of his 1,000-year reign from Jerusalem. Do I have that big picture pretty well in accord with what your view is?
I would say so. When you get to the apocalyptic part of Revelation 19, America's nowhere to be found. You got the kings of the north, the kings of the south, the kings of the east. Where's the kings where's Israel's most powerful ally? Nowhere to be found. But when Israel is finally threatened by the forces of the world, they're expecting the Mashiach to protect them. That's what Mogen David means, the shield of David, shield protector. But who is that Mogen David? It's Jesus Christ coming from heaven to save Israel.
So would you say then that after the rapture of the church, when all the Christians are removed from the world, including America, America is no longer a virtuous nation or a defender of Israel?
When Christians are drawn out of America, it's going to collapse like a cheap tent in the storm.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. So God's hand of judgment, I think, is being stayed on America today because of the presence of Christians in America and the hindering, the hindering work of the Holy Spirit through the church as we are salt and light. But obviously, once the church is removed, there's nothing that would stay the judgment of God upon America. Again, at that point in time, the focus will then be on Israel and the conversion of Israel.
As you remember, David, that great quote from Billy Graham, who said, if God doesn't judge America, he's going to have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, America has become Sodom and Gomorrah, and the only thing I believe that's holding America up is that there are true Christians who are, and of course it's a minority, who are serving God's purposes until the Great Commission is finally fulfilled.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Paul, that's all the time we have for today. We've just scratched the surface, in my view, in terms of discussing the issues contained in our 8-page November Last Days Beacon, America's Forecast and Bible Prophecy. And this is only our second 8-page article that we've published in our 3+ years of existence. Of course, the October Last Days Beacon article by Pauldinger was our first 8-pager, and this is a very suitable successor to that. I think you will be both informed and encouraged by the contents of this issue. And now our announcer, Dane Rome, will share how you may obtain multiple copies of this informative article.
Thank you, Dr. Schnitker. Today, we're offering an excellent article to accompany this series of messages. Our November Last Days Beacon article is entitled, America is Forecast in Bible Prophecy, Part 2. In this article, Pauldinger makes the case that the America's dollar bill announces that America is Christ's kingdom. You may order 5 copies for $5 or 25 copies for $15. Just go to our website, www.swpm.us, and go to our bookstore. Type in the title of the article, America is Forecast in Bible Prophecy, Part 2. The website address again is www.swpm.us. Well, friends, join us again next time for next week's Last Days Beacon program, brought to you by Southwest Prophecy Ministries. And until then, this is your announcer, Dane Rome, saying thanks for listening.